The rain in the Black-Briar territory didn't wash things clean. It just made the rot smell sweeter. Vesper stood knee-deep in mud, her shovel hitting the wet earth with a rhythmic, sickening thud. Thwack, squish, thwack. She was 21 years old, but her hands looked like they belonged to a woman of 50. They were calloused, scarred, and perpetually stained with the grey clay of the pack's cemetery. While the rest of the pack was up at the main estate, preparing for the centennial solstice ball, Vesper was doing what she had done every day since she was 6 years old. She was digging a grave. They called her the grave walker. They said she was born without a soul. They said her mother had been a rogue witch who cursed the pack with her dying breath, leaving Vesper behind as a bad omen. Because of this, Alpha Garrick had forbidden her from living indoors. She slept in the tool shed behind the crypts. She ate the food that was thrown out for the compost. She was lower than an omega. She was a ghost that hadn't faded yet. The wind howled, whipping her thin, oversized canvas coat against her shivering frame. She wasn't shivering from the cold, though. She was shivering from the noise. To anyone else, the cemetery was silent. But to Vesper, it was loud. She could hear the hum of the earth, the vibration of the roots, and the whispers of the ancestors buried beneath her feet. They weren't scary whispers. They were the only friends she had. "Dig deeper, little one," the wind seemed to sigh. "The storm is bringing a monster tonight." A bright beam of light cut through the rain, blinding her. Vesper shielded her eyes with a muddy hand. The engine of a luxury SUV roared as it tore through the cemetery gates, disrespecting the dead, crushing the headstones of the lower-ranking wolves. The car skidded to a halt. The door opened, and Beta Run stepped out. He was dressed in a tuxedo, holding a large black umbrella over his head. He didn't offer one to Vesper. He looked at her with a sneer that curled his upper lip, revealing a gold-capped tooth. "Get in the trunk, Gravewalker," Roan barked. "Alpha Garrick wants you at the house." Vesper gripped her shovel tighter. "I haven't finished Old Man Miller's plot. The ground is freezing." "Forget the dead," Roan shouted, kicking a vase of wilted lilies over. "The king is coming, King Kade, and he requires a local guide, someone expendable." Vesper's blood ran cold. King Kade of Stormhold. The stories about him were enough to make grown warriors wet themselves. They said he was rotting from the inside out, cursed by a dark fey magic, and that he killed anyone who looked him in the eye. If he was coming here, and if Garrick wanted her there, it wasn't to serve drinks. It was to be a sacrifice. Roan grabbed her by the scruff of her coat and dragged her toward the car. He threw her into the trunk like a bag of mulch. The smell of gasoline and exhaust filled her nose as the lid slammed shut, plunging her into darkness. But in the dark, her eyes didn't stay hazel. For a fleeting second, they flashed a terrifying, vibrant violet. The trunk opened 10 minutes later to the sounds of violins and laughter. The Black-Briar Pack house was a palace of glass and timber, glowing warmly against the storm. Roan hauled Vesper out. She was covered in grave mud, smelling of wet earth and decay. He marched her through the servants' entrance and shoved her directly into the grand ballroom. The music stopped instantly. The silence was heavy, suffocating. 300 wolves in silk gowns and tailored suits turned to stare at the filth in their midst. At the head of the room, on a raised dais, sat Alpha Garrick. Beside him was his daughter, Saskia. Saskia was everything Vesper was not: blonde, curvaceous, and cruel. She wore a dress made of silver sequins that looked like dragon scales. "Oh, look, Daddy," Saskia's voice rang out, shrill and mocking. "You brought the pet." "I brought a tool," Alpha Garrick corrected, sipping his wine. He stood up and walked toward Vesper. He didn't come close, though. He stopped 5 feet away, wrinkling his nose at her scent. Or rather, her lack of one. That was the other thing that made them hate her. Vesper had no wolf scent. She smelled only of the dirt she dug. To them, she was a hollow shell. "The king is looking for the grave bloom," Garrick announced to the room. "He believes it will cure his sickness. It only grows in the deepest, most cursed parts of the graveyard. And since we cannot risk our valuable warriors, we send the rat," Saskia finished, giggling. She walked over to Vesper, holding a silver tray of hors d'oeuvres. "Here, have a last meal, rat. You know the grave bloom kills anyone who touches it." Saskia accidentally tipped the tray. Hot, oily sausage and cheese slid down the front of Vesper's muddy coat. The room erupted in laughter. It wasn't just amusement. It was relief. They were relieved that the sacrifice wasn't going to be one of them. Vesper didn't move. She didn't wipe the food off. She just looked at Saskia. "The grave bloom doesn't kill everyone," Vesper whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. "It only kills the wicked." Saskia's smile vanished. She raised her hand to slap Vesper, her claws extending. Boom! The heavy double doors of the ballroom didn't open. They were blown off their hinges. A gust of freezing wind, smelling of ozone, iron and pure concentrated power, swept through the hall. The candles flickered and died, plunging the room into semi-darkness. From the storm outside, a figure emerged. He was colossal. King Kade. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, wearing a long coat made of black wolf fur. But he did not look well. His skin was pale, almost grey, and black veins spider-webbed up his neck, pulsing with a sickly rhythm. He walked with a slight limp, but the aura rolling off him was strong enough to crush the breath out of every wolf in the room. Behind him marched his elite guard, the Storm Legion, their armor clanking in unison. Kade stopped in the center of the room. He didn't look at Alpha Garrick. He didn't look at Saskia. His eyes, burning with a feverish, molten gold light, scanned the shadows. "I smell," Kade rasped, his voice sounding like 2 boulders grinding together. "I smell life." Alpha Garrick scrambled down from the dais, bowing so low his nose touched the floor. "Your Majesty, we are honored. We have prepared the sacrifice you requested. The girl who knows the graveyard." He pointed a trembling finger at Vesper. Kade turned his head. His gaze landed on Vesper. She was standing there, covered in mud and food, looking like the lowest creature on earth. But Kade didn't look at the mud. He looked at her soul. He took a step toward her. Then another. He staggered, the sickness clearly eating him alive. He fell to one knee, clutching his chest, coughing black blood onto the pristine marble floor. "My king!" His guards rushed forward, weapons drawn. "Back!" Kade roared, the command freezing everyone in place. He looked up at Vesper, his golden eyes wide with shock. "You!" he wheezed. "Come here." Vesper felt it then. It wasn't the mate bond she had heard about in fairy tales, the instant romance. This was different. It was a magnetic pull, a biological imperative. Her heart, which had been beating a slow, sad rhythm for 20 years, suddenly kick-started into a drum solo. She walked toward him. The crowd parted, terrified of the dying king. Saskia tried to grab Vesper's arm. "Don't you dare touch him, you filthy!" Vesper pulled her arm away with a strength she didn't know she had. She walked until she was standing directly in front of the kneeling king. Up close, he smelled of thunderstorms and pain. "They say you are cursed," Vesper whispered, looking down at him. "I am dying," Kade corrected, his breath coming in ragged gasps, "and only the earth can save me." "I am the earth," Vesper said simply. She reached out. The entire room gasped. An Omega touching a king without permission was a death sentence. But Vesper didn't care. She placed her muddy, calloused hand directly onto the king's cheek, right over the black veins. The moment skin touched skin, a shockwave blasted through the room. It wasn't sound. It was light. A blinding pulse of violet energy exploded from Vesper's hand. The black veins on Kade's face hissed and retreated, recoiling from her touch as if she were made of holy fire. Kade gasped, his back arching as the pain vanished, replaced by a rush of pure, clean vitality. He grabbed her wrist. His grip was iron, but it wasn't to hurt her. It was to hold her there. The light faded. Kade looked up. The grey was gone from his skin. The fever was gone from his eyes. He stood up, slowly, towering over her, pulling Vesper up with him until her feet dangled off the ground, her body pressed against his massive chest. He buried his face in her muddy neck and inhaled deeply. "Mine," he growled. Alpha Garrick stepped forward, stuttering. Your Majesty, that is the Grave Walker. She is defective. She has no wolf." Kade turned his head slowly to look at Garrick. His eyes were no longer just gold. They were swirling with a violet rim, the reflection of Vesper's power. "Defective," Kade said, his voice calm and terrifying. "You fool. You have been making a goddess scrub your floors." The silence in the Black-Briar ballroom was shattered by the sound of Alpha Garrick's glass falling from his hand. It didn't break. It bounced on the thick carpet, spilling red wine like blood. "Goddess," Garrick whispered, his face draining of color. "She digs holes, Your Majesty. She smells like fertilizer." King Kade didn't look at Garrick. He was too busy staring at the woman in his arms. Vesper was trembling violently now, the adrenaline of the moment fading, replaced by the crushing weight of 20 years of fear. She pushed against Kade's chest, her muddy hands staining his expensive black shirt. "Put me down," she rasped. "Please, I'm getting dirt on you." "I do not care about the dirt," Kade rumbled. He turned to the door, carrying her as easily as if she were made of hollow bird bones. "Wait!" Alpha Garrick found his courage, or perhaps his stupidity. He stepped in front of the king, blocking the exit. "You cannot just take her. She is Black-Briar property. She is an Omega under my protection." Kade stopped. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. The frost on the windows cracked. Kade didn't shout. He didn't roar. He simply looked at Garrick with eyes that swirled with ancient, lethal boredom. "Protection?" Kade repeated. "You starved her. You let your pack mock her. You prepared her as a human sacrifice for a root." Kade took a step forward. Garrick scrambled back, his wolf whining in submission. "If I leave this hall, and I hear even a whisper that you have tried to follow us," Kade said, his voice projecting into the mind of every wolf in the room, "I will return. And I will not be looking for a cure. I will be looking for a graveyard, large enough to fit your entire bloodline." He walked out into the storm, leaving the Black-Briar Pack on their knees in the ruins of their celebration. The back of the king's armored transport was quiet. It smelled of leather and Kade's scent, ozone and dark pine. Vesper sat on the edge of the seat, huddled as far away from him as possible. She hugged her knees to her chest, trying to make herself small, trying to disappear. Kade sat opposite her. He watched her, his golden eyes glowing in the dim light of the passing street lamps. The sickness was receding, but the black veins on his neck were still there, pulsing faintly. He was not cured. He was just paused. "You are shivering," Kade said. He reached for a fur blanket folded on the seat. Vesper flinched. She threw her hands up to cover her face. "I didn't steal it," she cried out. "I didn't steal the energy. It just happened. Don't hurt me." Kade froze. The hand holding the blanket stopped in midair. His heart clenched. He realized then that she didn't see a savior. She saw another alpha, another monster who wanted something from her. "I know you didn't steal it," Kade said softly. He placed the blanket on the seat between them, letting her take it if she wanted. "You gave it. You saved my life, Vesper." Vesper peeked through her fingers. She slowly lowered her hands. She reached out and touched the soft fur of the blanket. It was warmer than anything she had ever owned. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did it work? The healers said I was broken. They said I had no magic." "They lied," Kade said. "Or they were blind. The rot that is killing me. It is old magic. Fey magic. A normal wolf's healing cannot touch it. But you—" He looked at her muddy hands. "You smell like the earth. Not the dirt, Vesper. The deep earth. The roots. You are a conduit." Vesper looked at her palms. "I just talk to them," she mumbled. "To whom?" "The dead," she said, her voice so quiet Kade almost missed it. "They are lonely in the cold. I dig the holes so they can sleep. If I leave, who will listen to them?" Kade looked at this girl, this ragged, starving creature who worried more about the ghosts in the ground than the king sitting in front of her. A fierce, possessive protectiveness roared to life in his chest. "You will not go back to the graves," Kade vowed. "From tonight on, the only thing you will listen to is the beating of my heart." Stormhold was not a house. It was a fortress carved into the side of a jagged cliff overlooking the sea. The waves crashed against the rocks below, sending spray high into the air. It was a place of stone, steel, and power. As the car pulled into the underground garage, Vesper felt the panic rising again. The walls were too thick. The air was too filtered. She couldn't hear the wind. She couldn't feel the soil. "I can't breathe," she gasped, clawing at the door handle. Kade opened the door. "Easy. You're safe." "Too much stone," she wheezed, stumbling out of the car. Her legs gave way. Kade caught her, but instead of dragging her inside, he did something unexpected. He carried her past the elevators, past the guards, and walked straight out onto the open-air training deck that overlooked the ocean. He set her down on the cold concrete, open to the sky. The rain had stopped, but the wind was wild. Vesper inhaled deeply, the salt air filling her lungs. She dropped to her knees, placing her hands flat on the ground, searching for a connection. "There is no soil here," she whispered, distressed. "It's all concrete." Kade watched her. He snapped his fingers. A guard appeared from the shadows. "Sir?" "Bring me the planters," Kade ordered. "From the atrium, all of them. And bring a bag of earth from the greenhouse." "Sir?" The guard looked confused. "Did I stutter?" Kade growled. 10 minutes later, Vesper sat in the center of the training deck, surrounded by overturned pots of expensive imported soil. She dug her hands into the dirt, sighing in relief as the violet glow returned faintly to her skin. Kade sat on a bench nearby, watching her. He didn't understand it. But if his queen needed dirt to breathe, he would turn his entire castle into a garden. Back at the Black-Briar estate, the party was over. The guests had been ushered out. The ballroom was empty, save for Alpha Garrick and his daughter Saskia. Saskia was throwing a tantrum. She was ripping the flowers out of the vases and throwing them at the wall. He took her. He took the rat. That was my moment, Daddy. I was supposed to be the one who saved the king. Garrick sat on the edge of the dais, holding his head in his hands. He wasn't listening to his daughter. He was thinking about the violet light. He was thinking about the way the king's black veins had retreated at Vesper's touch. "Shut up, Saskia!" Garrick barked. Saskia froze, a vase poised in her hand. "Excuse me?" "You stupid girl," Garrick hissed, standing up. "We thought she was a null. We thought she was useless. But did you see the king? He was dying when he walked in, and when he touched her, he healed." "So?" Saskia sneered. "She's a glorified battery. Who cares?" "The king cares," Garrick shouted. "And more importantly, the enemies of the king will care." Garrick walked over to the window, looking out at the dark cemetery where Vesper used to live. A cruel, calculating smile spread across his face. "The king took our property. He humiliated us. But he also revealed his weakness. He needs her to live. If we take her back, we don't just get a servant." Saskia's eyes lit up, understanding dawning on her face. "We get the king on a leash." "Exactly." Garrick dialed a number on his phone. It wasn't a local number. It was an encrypted line. "Get me the warlord of the Red Sands. Tell him I found the cure for the alpha sickness. And tell him it's a girl." For 3 days, Stormhold was peaceful, or as peaceful as a fortress of war could be. King Kade had given Vesper the run of the East Wing, specifically the royal greenhouse. It was a massive dome of glass perched on the cliff edge, filled with rare, exotic plants that Kade had collected from across the continent. But Vesper didn't care about the orchids or the expensive roses. She was in the corner, kneeling in the dirt, tending to a patch of withered, dying weeds she'd found growing through a crack in the floor. "You like the broken things," a voice rumbled. Vesper looked up. Kade was standing in the doorway. He wasn't wearing his armor today. He was in a loose linen shirt, the top buttons undone, revealing the black veins that still traced a web over his heart. He looked better, stronger, but the sickness was still there, waiting. "They aren't broken," Vesper said softly, brushing her thumb over a brown, shriveled leaf. "They're just thirsty." As she spoke, a pulse of violet light hummed from her fingertips. It wasn't flashy, like in the ballroom. It was quiet, like a heartbeat. The brown leaf turned green instantly. The stem straightened. A tiny white flower bloomed in seconds, unfolding its petals to look at her. Kade walked over, his eyes wide. He knelt beside her, ignoring the dirt on his trousers. "My healers have studied the ancient rot for a century," he said, his voice rough. "They say it cannot be reversed, only delayed. It consumes life. It turns wolves into husks." He reached out, covering her hand with his. "But you don't just heal. You resurrect." Vesper tried to pull her hand away, but he held it firm. "Why does it scare you?" Kade asked. "Because in my pack," Vesper whispered, looking at the floor, "if you are different, you are dangerous. And dangerous things get put in cages." "You are dangerous," Kade agreed, lifting her chin so she had to look at him. You are the most dangerous thing in my kingdom, because you are the only one who can save it. And I will never put you in a cage, Vesper. I will build you a throne." The air between them grew hot, charged with the magnetic pull of the bond. Kade leaned in. He wasn't looking at her like a tool anymore. He was looking at her like a starving man looks at water. But the moment was shattered by the screech of the perimeter sirens. Miles away, in the scorched badlands known as the Red Sands, a deal was being struck. Alpha Garrick and Saskia stood uncomfortably in the heat, surrounded by tents made of flayed beast skins. The smell here was sulphur and dried blood. Sitting on a throne made of scrap metal and bone was Warlord Vorian. He was a lichen, but he was wrong. His fur, when he shifted, was patchy and diseased. In human form, his skin was covered in ritualistic scars. He was an outcast, a necromancer who had been exiled for practicing the forbidden art of soul binding. "You say she glows," Vorian rasped, picking his teeth with a silver toothpick. "Violet," Garrick confirmed, sweating in his suit. She touched the king, and the rot recoiled. She healed him instantly. Saskia stepped forward, wrinkling her nose at the smell of the warlord. "She's just a grave digger, a freak. We want her back, so we can discipline her." Vorian laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound, like stones rattling in a tin can. "Discipline her? You fool. You held the keys to immortality, and you made her scrub toilets." Vorian stood up. He towered over Garrick. "The ancient rot that kills the king. It is my creation, and I sent it to him 10 years ago in a cursed letter. It was meant to kill him slowly, to leave the throne empty for me." Garrick paled. He had allied himself with the king's assassin. If she can cure it, then she undoes my life's work," Vorian snarled. "But if I have her, if I can bind that violet light to my own blood, I won't just kill the king. I will become immortal." He turned to his shaman, a hunched figure in the shadows. "Prepare the dead walkers. We do not attack with claws today. We attack with the one thing the king cannot fight." "What is that?" Saskia asked, her voice trembling. Vorian smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. "The past." Night fell over Stormhold. The sirens were blaring, but the guards on the walls couldn't see an army. The thermal scanners showed nothing. The motion sensors were silent. "Report!" Kade shouted, storming into the command center. "Why are the alarms sounding?" "We don't know, sir," the captain said, tapping frantically at the console. "The sensors are detecting a massive energy spike at the main gate. But there's no one there." Vesper ran into the room. She was breathless, clutching her chest. "They're here," she gasped. Kade turned to her. "Who? The cameras show nothing." "Not people," Vesper whispered, her eyes wide and violet. "Ghosts." Crack. The massive reinforced glass of the command center observation window spiderwebbed. Then it shattered. But no rock had hit it. A black mist poured into the room, swirling like oil in water. It didn't smell like smoke. It smelled like the inside of a coffin, damp earth, stale lilies, and decay. The guards drew their weapons, but the mist ignored them. It coalesced into shapes. Wolves. But not flesh and blood, wolves. These were spectral skeletal forms, their eyes burning with green necromantic fire. "Wraiths!" the captain shouted, firing his assault rifle. The bullets passed harmlessly through the smoke wolves and embedded in the wall. One of the smoke wolves lunged at Kade. It passed through his chest. Kade roared, dropping to his knees. The contact didn't cut his skin. It froze his heart. The black veins on his neck which Vesper had healed, suddenly flared blacker than before. The rot was reacting to the ghosts. "Kade!" Vesper screamed. She tried to run to him, but the room was filling with the spectral pack. They were swirling around her, whispering in 1,000 voices. "Digger! Grave Walker! Come back to the dirt!" Kade was on the floor, convulsing. The necromancy was feeding the sickness in his blood, accelerating it. He was dying, right there in the center of his impregnable fortress. "Stop it!" Vesper yelled at the ghosts. She swiped at them, but her hands passed through the mist. She was powerless. She was just a girl who dug holes. "No," a voice whispered in her mind. "You don't just dig holes. You plant seeds." Vesper looked at Kade. He was turning grey. The life was draining out of him. She felt that pull again, the magnetic snap of the bond. If he died, she died. Not physically, but her soul would shatter. She closed her eyes. She stopped trying to fight the ghosts with her hands. She reached out with her senses. She felt the earth beneath the foundation of the fortress. She felt the ancient roots of the mountain, and she felt the spirits. They weren't evil. They were enslaved. Vorian was forcing them to attack. They were in pain. "I hear you," Vesper whispered. She opened her eyes. The violet light didn't just glow. It exploded. It rushed out of her like a shockwave, but it wasn't violent. It was a wave of pure, absolute peace. "Be silent," Vesper commanded. The voice wasn't hers. It was the voice of the underworld. The swirling smoke wolves froze in midair. The green fire in their eyes flickered and turned violet. The connection to Vorian, the necromancer miles away, was severed instantly. Vesper walked through the frozen ghosts. She knelt beside Kade. She placed her glowing hands on his chest. "Breathe," she ordered. Kade gasped, sucking in air as if he had just broken the surface of the ocean. The black veins retreated, terrified of the light pouring from his mate. He looked up at her, dazed, weak, but alive. He saw Vesper standing amidst a circle of spectral wolves who were now bowing to her. She wasn't just a healer. She was the shepherd of the dead. But the silence was broken by a slow, mocking applause coming from the main screen on the wall. The frequency had been hacked. Vorian's scarred face appeared on the monitor. "Bravo," the warlord croaked. "You are stronger than I thought, little grave walker, but you can't save everyone." The screen split. It showed a new live feed. It was the cemetery at Black-Briar, Vesper's old home. Vorian's men were there, planting explosives on the crypts. "Surrender yourself to me," Vorian demanded, "or I will blow your ancestors to dust. I will destroy every grave you ever dug." Vesper stared at the screen. Those weren't just graves. Those were the only people who had ever been kind to her. They were her family. She turned to Kade. Her face was a mask of cold, terrifying resolve. "Get up, my king," she said. "We have a war to fight." The flight back to the Black-Briar territory was silent, but it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of a blade being sharpened. Vesper sat in the troop transport bay of the king's VTOL aircraft. She wasn't wearing the silk gown anymore. She was dressed in Kade's spare tactical gear, black cargo pants that were rolled up at the cuffs, and a heavy flak jacket that swallowed her small frame. She didn't look like a soldier. She looked like a girl wearing her father's clothes, but the air around her hummed with a terrifying violet static. She was staring at her hands, flexing her fingers, watching the light dance beneath her skin. "They are loud tonight," Vesper whispered. Kade sat opposite her, sharpening a broadsword made of pure silver. He paused. Who? The spirits? The ancestors, Vesper corrected. The ones buried in Black-Briar. They know Vorian is there. They know he is disturbing their rest. They are screaming, Kade. Kade stood up. The movement was fluid, powerful. The rot was gone, suppressed entirely by Vesper's proximity. He knelt before her, taking her glowing hands in his. Then we will silence them. We will put them back to sleep. Vorian has an army, Vesper said, her eyes locking onto his. He has necromancy. He can raise the dead to fight for him. How do we fight an enemy that doesn't bleed? Kade smiled, a dark, feral expression that reminded her why the world feared the Alpha King. He fights with puppets, Vesper. I fight with the Queen. He forces the dead to rise. You will simply ask them. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Your Majesty, we are approaching the drop zone. The cemetery is swarming with hostiles. Alpha Garrick's forces have surrendered. The pack is being held hostage in the crypts. Vesper's jaw tightened. They surrendered. They didn't even fight for their own dead. Cowards do not fight, Kade said, standing up and handing her a small, heavy object. It was a radio. Stay on the comms. I will clear the path. You get to the heart of the graveyard. The storm had followed them. Thunder crashed over the Black-Briar estate as Kade and his Iron Legion descended from the sky on repelling lines. They landed amidst the tombstones like vengeful shadows. Vorian's mercenaries were waiting. They were a motley crew of rogue wolves and dark magic practitioners armed with silver-tipped pikes. The battle was instant and brutal. Kade shifted mid-air, landing as a massive black wolf. He didn't just bite, he obliterated. He tore through the mercenaries, paving a road of blood toward the main crypt. But Vesper didn't drop from the sky. She landed the helicopter in the clearing where she used to dump the compost. She walked out. She walked past the fighting, past the snarling wolves. No one touched her. They couldn't. The violet aura around her acted like a shield. When a mercenary tried to lunge at her, he was thrown backward by an invisible force, his bones snapping before he hit the ground. She reached the center of the graveyard. It was a scene of desecration. Vorian stood atop the largest mausoleum, the resting place of the first Alpha. He was chanting, his voice a scratchy, awful sound that made Vesper's teeth ache. Green fire swirled around him, seeping into the ground, pulling at the bones beneath. "Rise!" Vorian screamed. "Rise and serve your new master." The ground began to churn. Skeletal hands clawed their way out of the dirt. But they weren't just skeletons. They were coated in a sickly green slime, bound by Vorian's will. Alpha Garrick and Saskia were tied to a fence post nearby, watching in horror. When they saw Vesper walking through the chaos, unscathed, glowing, Garrick screamed, "Vesper, help us! We are your pack!" Vesper stopped. She looked at the man who had made her sleep in a shed. She looked at Saskia, who had thrown hot sausages at her just days ago. "You are not my pack," Vesper said, her voice amplified by the magic ringing across the battlefield. "You are just guests in my graveyard." Vorian stopped chanting. He looked down from the mausoleum, his scarred face twisting into a sneer. "The little digger returns. You're too late, girl. I have awakened the first Alpha. When he rises, he will tear your king apart." The ground beneath the mausoleum exploded. A massive, skeletal wolf, held together by green magic and rotting sinew, clawed its way out. It was the size of a tank. It let out a silent roar that shattered headstones for 50 yards. Kade, in his wolf form, charged the bone beast. He slammed into it, but it was like hitting a mountain. The skeletal wolf swiped Kade aside, sending him crashing through a stone wall. Kade yelped, a sound of genuine pain. "Kade!" Vesper screamed. "He cannot kill what is already dead." Vorian laughed. "Submit, Spirit Walker. Give me your power, and I will let your pet wolf live." Vesper looked at Kade, broken in the rubble. She looked at the green fire defiling the graves she had tended for years. She closed her eyes. She stopped thinking like a victim. She stopped thinking like a wolf. She started thinking like the grave walker. She didn't fight the dead. She felt them. She felt the soul of the first Alpha, trapped inside that bone construct, screaming in agony. Vorian wasn't giving them life. He was torturing them. Vesper dropped to her knees in the mud. She placed both hands on the earth. "I release you," she whispered. It started as a ripple. The violet light poured from her hands into the soil, racing through the root systems like burning mercury. It touched every grave. It touched every bone. The green fire turned purple. The skeletal wolf froze. It stopped attacking Kade. It turned its massive hollow skull toward Vorian. "What?" Vorian gasped, his control slipping. "Obey me." "They don't know you," Vesper said, standing up. Her eyes were pure white light now. "But they know me. I planted the flowers on their graves. I kept the weeds away. I told them stories when the winter was cold." She pointed at Vorian. "You are trespassing." The skeletal wolf didn't roar this time. It leaped. It bypassed Kade completely and launched itself onto the mausoleum roof. Vorian screamed as the bones of the first Alpha pinned him down. The green magic shattered. All around the graveyard, the zombies Vorian had raised stopped fighting. They turned on the mercenaries. It was a massacre. The dead defended their keeper. Kade shifted back to human form, limping to Vesper's side. He was bleeding, covered in dust, but he looked at her with absolute worship. "You turned his army against him." "No," Vesper said, her voice sounding tired, the glow fading. "I just reminded them who they were." The battle was over in minutes. The mercenaries fled or were dragged into the earth by the vengeful spirits. Vorian was held down by the skeleton, alive but terrified. Vesper walked over to where Alpha Garrick and Saskia were tied up. They were unharmed, but they were broken. Their world-view had been shattered. The girl they bullied was commanding the afterlife. "Vesper," Saskia sobbed, snot running down her face. We didn't know. We're sorry. Please, tell the ghosts to go away." Vesper looked at them. She didn't feel hate anymore. She felt pity. They were small. "You wanted the king's favor," Vesper said. "You wanted power." "We were wrong," Garrick pleaded. "We will restore you. You can have the master suite. You can be Beta. Anything." Vesper looked at Kade. "Do you hear that? He thinks I want a room in his house." Kade laughed, a dark, rich sound. "He doesn't realize you already own the house." Kade turned to his Iron Legion. "Arrest Alpha Garrick and his daughter. Charge them with conspiracy to commit regicide and abuse of a royal mate." "Royal mate," Garrick gasped. Kade pulled Vesper into his side, kissing her soot-stained forehead. "She isn't just my mate, Garrick. She is the Spirit Walker, and by the laws of the first Alpha." He pointed to the skeleton still holding Vorian. "She outranks me." Just then, the ground rumbled again. But it wasn't a ghost. It was the skeleton of the first Alpha collapsing into dust, its job done. But before it faded, a wisp of white light floated from the pile of bones. It took the shape of a massive wolf. It bowed to Vesper. Then it faded into the night. Vorian, now free from the weight of the bones, scrambled up, pulling a hidden dagger. "If I can't have the power," he shrieked, lunging at Vesper. "No one can." Kade moved to intercept, but he was too slow. Vesper didn't move. She didn't need to. From the shadows of the crypt, a new figure stepped out. A figure that shouldn't be there. A figure that had been dead for 10 years. It was a woman with Vesper's eyes. Vorian's dagger never reached Vesper. The woman who stepped from the shadows didn't shout. She simply raised a hand, and the air in the graveyard turned solid. Vorian hit an invisible wall, crumbling to the ground, his nose breaking with a wet crunch. Vesper stared at the woman. She was older, her hair streaked with grey, but she had the same violet eyes, and the same high cheekbones. It was like looking into a mirror that showed the future. "Mother?" Vesper whispered, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. "They said you died. They said you cursed the pack." "They lied," the woman said, her voice sounding like wind chimes in a storm. "I am Seraphina, and I didn't curse the pack, Vesper. I cursed the ground so they couldn't find me." Seraphina walked forward, stepping over the groaning Vorian. She cupped Vesper's face. "I sensed your power the moment you were born. The warlords, the council, they all wanted to weaponize you. So I hid us. I went into a deep stasis beneath the first Alpha's tomb, and I masked your scent with the smell of the grave." Vesper's eyes filled with tears. "The rot, the flowers dying when I touch them." "A glamour," Seraphina explained, "to make you seem worthless, to make them look away. If they thought you were a defect, they wouldn't look for the goddess underneath." She looked at King Kade, who was watching them with awe. "And it worked. Until you found a king worthy of breaking the spell." Kade bowed his head. "I am honored, Lady Seraphina." "You are lucky," Seraphina corrected with a small smile. "You found the only woman who can walk between worlds." Vorian groaned, trying to crawl away. "This isn't over," he spat, blood bubbling on his lips. "I have armies. I have—" "You have nothing," Vesper said, turning to him. The sadness was gone. She was the queen now. "You tried to use the dead as soldiers. You disturbed their rest." She looked at the open graves, at the churned earth. "The dead do not like to be woken, Vorian, and they are very hungry." Vesper lowered her hand. The earth beneath Vorian turned to quicksand. Not mud. Shadow. Hands, spectral and cold, reached up from the soil. They grabbed Vorian's ankles. They grabbed his wrists. "No!" Vorian shrieked, clawing at the grass. "Mercy! I demand a trial." "This is your trial," Kade said, standing beside Vesper, "and the jury is everyone you ever killed." The shadows pulled harder. Vorian was dragged down, inch by inch, screaming until the earth swallowed him whole. The ground sealed shut over him, leaving no trace, not even a headstone. He was gone, erased from history, buried in an unmarked grave for eternity. The sun began to crest over the horizon, painting the destroyed cemetery in hues of soft pink and gold. The battle was over. The silence was peaceful now. Alpha Garrick and Saskia were still tied to the fence post. They were shivering, not from the cold, but from the realization that their protector, Vorian, was gone. Vesper walked over to them. Kade handed her his sword, but she shook her head. "I don't need steel," she said. "Vesper, please," Garrick begged, tears streaming down his face. "We're family. I raised you." "You housed me," Vesper corrected. "You didn't raise me. The rats in the shed raised me better than you did." "We'll leave," Saskia cried, her vanity gone. We'll go to the Rogue Lands. You'll never see us again." "No," Vesper said thoughtfully. "Exile is too easy. In the Rogue Lands, you might find power again. You might hurt someone else." She looked at the cemetery. It was a mess. Tombstones were overturned, the grass was burnt, and the crypts were defiled. It would take years to fix. "This pack needs a new alpha," Vesper announced to the gathering survivors of Black-Briar. "Select one from among you who has honor. As for these two," she pointed at Garrick and Saskia. "You like status? You like titles? Fine. I hereby strip you of the name Black-Briar. You are now the lowest of Omegas." Garrick gasped. "You can't—" "And you have a job," Vesper continued, a small, cold smile playing on her lips. "This graveyard is a mess. Someone needs to fix it. Someone needs to dig the new plots. Someone needs to scrub the moss off the stones." She reached into her pocket, or rather, the pocket of Kade's tactical vest she was wearing, and pulled out a pair of worn, dirty gardening gloves. She tossed them at Saskia's feet. "Start digging, Saskia. If I see a single weed on my ancestors' graves, you won't get dinner." Kade let out a bark of laughter. It was the perfect punishment. They weren't martyrs. They were just the help. 6 months later, the balcony of Stormhold was no longer a cold concrete slab. It was a lush garden. Vines of moonflowers climbed the stone walls, and rare herbs grew in silver pots. Vesper stood at the railing, wearing a gown of deep purple velvet that matched her eyes. She wasn't pale anymore. She was glowing with health and power. Kade walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. The black veins were gone completely. He was stronger than he had ever been. "The council is arriving for the coronation," Kade murmured into her hair. "They are terrified of you." "Good," Vesper smiled, leaning back into him. "Fear keeps them honest." "Are you happy?" Kade asked, turning her around. "You could have had any life. You chose the throne." "I didn't choose the throne," Vesper said, reaching up to fix his collar. "I chose the wolf who sat on it." Kade kissed her, a deep, soul-sealing kiss that felt like coming home. Below them, the pack howled, a sound of unity and strength. The Grave Walker had become the life-giver. The reject had become the queen. And the king had finally found his cure. And that is the story of Vesper and King Kade. From a muddy grave to a throne of gold, she proved that true power isn't about how loud you can roar, but about how deep your roots go. What did you think of Garrick and Saskia's punishment? Was making them the new gravediggers poetic justice, or should Vesper have been harsher? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this unique tale of magic, betrayal, and romance, please smash that like button. It helps the channel so much. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next intense love story. Until next time, keep your secrets deep and your heart wild. Thanks for watching.